situation and trying to turn it back around to close the deal. So it's spin selling is not following the traditional sales model. And then pitch anything was actually pretty interesting because that completely I restructured one of my pitch decks completely based on that book because it was really interesting. But those are not Agile related.
Very cool. Well,
that's the most recent one.
Sweet. No, that's awesome. All right, I've started up the recording, and we are going to go ahead and get started at 2 minutes past. We've been normally starting at 5 past, but we want to make sure we pack in as much content as we can. So I'll go ahead and kick us off here. So welcome everybody who's joined us so far to Coaching Agile Journeys. This is our 11th presentation, so it's very exciting to have you here. Because we're going to be doing the first couple minutes, we're going to get kicked off. We're going to look at a quick glance of who's here, how many are with us, and then quickly touch on some of the features of WebEx. Then we're going to go to our main topic here in just a second. We'll be finished up at about 4:55. Our target will be to give everybody 5 minutes back as we head out of here. So who are we, Agile Coaching Journey? We just are a group of Agilists who get together, and this is a labor of love. We just like bringing good content together, and so hopefully you find our content today interesting. And I want to invite you to connect with us. Our website's coachingagilejourneys.com. We have our emails there if you want to email us. And so briefly on WebEx, you have a chat feature. So if you open up the options panel, you should see chat, Q&A. We won't be doing any polls today that I'm aware of, but we will be doing chat and QA. So if you have a question throughout the presentation, I'll be collecting those in the background, and we'll bring those up to Fred at the end. So have that Q&A there, and if you have any neat thoughts that stand out or that's a good point, feel free to shoot it out in the chat as well. So today our speaker is going to be Fred. I'm not even going to try your last name, Fred, but Fred is an awesome guy, and I'll let him give his intro. Before we kick it over to Fred and I hand you the ball, Heidi, do you have any final thoughts before we kick off here?
No, I'm really excited to hear his topic because one of my talks is when will it be done, and so it was interesting. I'm sure you guys will find it interesting, those who might have seen my when will it be done talk, to see the contrast between how he presents the information, which I think is really awesome. He gave me a little preview, so I'm really excited to have Fred speak with us today.
Excellent. All right. Well, with that, Fred, it is all yours, and
all right, thank you.
I'm seeing both of your screens right now. Instead of just your presenter screen.
Yeah, let me switch to just my one. I have too many monitors. What a first world problem.
That is a good problem to have. I'm a big fan of multiple monitors.
How about there?
Excellent.
How about now?
Looks great. Yes, sir. It's all yours.
Good job. Thank you. So, yeah, my name is Fred Mastropasqua. So it's just the way it's spelled. It's not too crazy, but yeah, it looks a little more daunting. So my name is Fred. I have over 20 years in IT, from software, hardware, networking. I'm an Agile coach and trainer, so I do a lot of coaching and training around the Tampa Bay area. Also one of the co-founders of Clearly Agile, where we build custom business applications and for businesses and new products. So a lot of my experience comes from working with multi-billion-dollar enterprises, as well as developing for our clients, even at Clearly Agile, dealing with external customers. And so I can, I have experiences with dealing with real-world projects and dealing with lots of different types of clients. I have my contact info here. I'll share that again at the end, and and lots of different certifications. Yay! So let's move into it. So traditional versus Agile project update. So I'm not here to badmouth waterfall. If you're familiar with the traditional process, that's what we call the waterfall method. I'm really here just to show differences between how we report projects in that traditional mindset or traditional project to how we do it in an Agile project. And then I'm going to level set everybody. I'm going to start level set everybody at first, so I apologize if some of this information you're familiar with, but I can't. It's hard to show what I show to real-world clients and real-world projects without having all the understanding of the basis. So traditionally we report on this stoplight of green, yellow, red. Right, and that's what we use in our traditional projects. So let's define what some of these are so that we're all on the same page. So green, right, the project is mostly on track to deliver on time with expected functionality and quality. That's the key there, is that green is saying we're going to deliver everything we expect as far as functionality concerns and the quality. yellow, right? Yellow means we have major issues or a ton of small issues that are jeopardizing the project completion. The delivery of expected functionality and quality is also in jeopardy. And then we have red. Red, our issues have extended beyond the project deadline, or extended the project beyond the deadline, and we're not going to have all the functionality, or we're not going to have the quality that we expected. And if I look at that now in traditional reporting with that information level set, we typically plan something out that looks like this, right? A Gantt chart, and as we move through this process, we report on whether we're green, yellow, or red. And that's how a lot of PMOs do it today for a lot of organizations. If I simplify this Gantt chart into our traditional, this is what our waterfall method looks like. And if we're not familiar with waterfall, it's where you complete one phase, then before you move into the next phase, and you complete all that work before moving on. So you get this kind of waterfall look and feel. So how does this work, right? We have our project A as we go through requirements, design, build and develop, and then testing. When we're in the design phase, we need all the people that can do design work. So we collect this group, we build this team of designers, and they're specialized in doing this design work. When the project moves into the development phase or building phase, then we have a group of developers, and they're specialized in building the product. And then we specialize our team of testers who are there to test. Now, being the great manager I am and trying to be the most efficient, when my project moves into the development or build phase, I take my group of designers and I move them on to the next project, right? So they're off that project now. And then when the developers are done, they move on to their next project, and the testers are there testing the product. And if they need to work with the developers, then maybe there's an issue there. Maybe I've left some people behind. What this leads to is building in what we call horizontal slices. So horizontal slices are, because of the traditional approach, we do all our requirements up front for all the functionality that we're going to have. And typically those might be business analysts for this example I used. Then we have our designers, and they're doing all the designs and mock-ups, possibly use cases, and they're getting all that work complete. Then when we move into the development, and here I'm talking specifically to software development, even within the development we have the different layers of development. So we have our different siloed sub-teams. So we have our front-end team doing the user interface. They specialize just in that piece of work. We have our back-end team. They specialize just in the back-end logic, and that's all they work in. And then we have our database team sometimes. And so we have layers within the development slice there. And then we get our testers, and they move into that, and they do all the testing, and then all the testing is complete. So this is horizontally what that approach looks like. So if I lay that over, let's say, a timeline, you'll notice that the build and development is double the size of the other other groups of work there, and I simplified this just for this example. When we're finished with requirements, we are now 20% complete with the project, right? And 20% complete in, we're reporting green. Green meaning, again, we're on time, we're going to have all the expected functionality, and it's going to be of the quality that we expect. And then we finish at the design phase. And so the requirements was 2 months in, and then we finished the design phase. So now we're 40% complete with our project. We're almost halfway done, if you think about it, right? We're 40% complete, and we're green. So we're 40% complete into our traditional project here, and we haven't yet to build one single thing or build anything at all. Yet we're reporting green, meaning we're going to be on time, we're going to have the expected functionality, and it's going to be of the quality we expect. Yet we haven't built anything yet, and we're 40% into the project. And that's 4 months into this timeline. Then we start our actual development. So let's say we go through halfway through our development, and we realize, okay, halfway through we're at 60% complete. Now we're yellow. So now we're letting the business know, hey, we're yellow. There are major issues or minor issues that we might delay the project, or we might not reach all our expected functionality and quality. And that's 6 months in. So we're 6 months in before we start reporting any serious issues, which is typically we're over halfway through the project. And then when we finish with development, we're 80% complete, and of course we're red at this point. We're definitely far behind. We're 8 months in. And if we had to make up the time, then we eat into testing time. Right? Testers can work all night and weekend, don't worry about them, or the project moves into, quote, production support, and then we try to fix a bunch of things in production. This is typically how it works in large organizations, right? It's the green, 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 and then it's yellow, and yellow never happens until over halfway through the process, right near the end. Let's compare and contrast that to, reporting with an Agile mindset. So in an Agile mindset, we typically have, we build in iterations. So we don't do all the requirements up front. We do some of the requirements, some of the design, some of the development, some of the testing. And because we're doing it all together like this, that lends us to have teams that are cross-functional, or teams that are maybe focused on different features of the same product. And since we have these cross-functional teams, that means we have everybody needed to deliver the work together working on a team. So whether that's the BA, the front end, the back end, database person, the tester, all of them together on one team. And so instead of building horizontally, in an iteration, we're building vertically. We're doing the requirements, we're doing the design, and we might, in this example, have two teams working on the same product. We're doing the front end, we're doing the back end, the database, and we're doing the testing. And so we're building complete functionality to done or to complete, and then we move into the next iteration. Right? And so those teams are now focused again on that, working from the top down. You'll start noticing a difference here in that we're not doing all the requirements, and the idea here is that there might be functionality that we end up not building, yet in the previous model, we've already put work into requirements and design for that functionality. We're trying to avoid that wasted work. So I've taken that same timeline in the previous example of 10 months, and I've split it over 20 iterations here. So each iteration, or in Scrum called a sprint, and this example is 2 weeks. So if I follow the same timeline, 2 months in, we're 4 iterations in, and we're 20% complete. We're green. Right? That's going to be the same. But along the way, we're building now. Instead of doing all the requirements and design, we're actually building functionality, which means that I know much sooner that there's problems. There's an issue. So at 4 months in, we're now 40% complete. I'm now reporting yellow. Okay, that's a big difference from before. At 40% complete, I'm still green, and I'm saying that all the functionality is going to be there, and yet we haven't built anything yet. Right? In this example, we're now yellow. What this allows, and 60% we're red. What this allows is, because I know sooner, I can now look down the road and see, okay, what functionality can I remove? What functionality can we cut out or change so that we can get back on track? And the requirements, let's just say iteration 17 has stuff we don't need. The requirements and the design work for that functionality is now not wasted time and wasted effort that we would have done before. We no longer have to worry about that, the requirements for that functionality or the design for that functionality. In the real world, how this typically looks when I report on this is that the minute we start a project, we turn yellow. And that's usually what really happens is 20% in, we're yellow. And because we're building, and that's when you learn the most is when you're actually doing the work. And then we become green again. And the reason for this is because at 20% yellow, I can work with the product owner, I can work with the client, say, look, this is how we're trajecting, we're off track, and we just started. But now the client, I've set expectations, and the client can now decide to make decisions on things they can leave out or not delivering all the bells and whistles, which I'll talk about in a few slides. And so that's how the red, yellow, and green work in this type of Agile environment. So let me go to more of the details of how we predict some of this stuff. On a brand new project, just so everyone's aware of the process we go through, we typically have a portfolio Kanban board. This is something that management looks at, because management typically doesn't care, or clients don't care what task you're working on, the team's working on. There might be items that the team's working on that are too low level for anyone at the stakeholder level or the management level to care, or at the client level. So we'll move the project through different, what we call on this Kanban board, different phases. And so a project might go through concept, market research, eventually gets to ready to build, and then it moves into refinement. This will be different for every client, every company. And then when it moves into design, development, testing, that's when that project's going through the iterations or going through sprints. Right? And then in this example, project A was broken down to release 1, release 2, release 3. being that project A is still in refinement, meaning that I know there's still more work to do for project A. And we haven't, and I can see from this example, we haven't done anything with project B yet. We haven't started any work there. And for example, project E is still in the market research phase. So that's the high level. Once I have an idea of, this is the kind of view I present to clients in order for them to see where the project is along the phases. We create a vision for the project. The product owner typically, or someone in charge of the product that has the authority, creates the vision, what direction we're going in. From that, we'll create our roadmap. So our roadmap is the example here, it can be done in many different ways. This is one way that I use. I've used other methods as well, but this is a simple example. So you have your quarter, what's your goal for that quarter, and then any features that support that goal. And that's the gray box. So that's kind of like the syntax or the template that you might use. So for example, in this example, Q1 is all about having user accounts. So in Q1, I want to be able to invite users to the system, have user roles or security roles, and I want to be able to do account recovery, like forgot password or whatever functionality that entails. Q2 is about guest applications. So I want to have document merging, guest portal, background checks. Q3 is track revenue and expenses. And then Q4 is share user inventory. Now you notice in Q3, there's a second bullet there in Q3 is revenue tracking. In Q4, we have revenue tracking year over year. So that's adding to something we did we're shooting for in the previous quarter. This gives us a roadmap and direction to go in to know what to focus on first. Once we have this roadmap in place, after we've done our vision, we then break down the most important things or the things that are coming up soon into product backlog items. Okay, so this is a real-world example of different product backlog items, but to not confuse everybody and to make it easier for the examples, I've renamed them all to just product backlog items A through product backlog item AB. So we take our roadmap, we break this functionality down to what we call product backlog items. This is specific to Scrum. So every item is something that has to be worked, a piece of functionality that has to be completed. And then the team goes off and estimates the work. Now, I'm not going to get into how we estimate in the Fibonacci sequence or Agile estimating here. I will just give a I'll briefly cover it in saying that sizing in this example and how a lot of teams use it, and my teams as well, is that we size relative, each story is relative to another story. So in this example, I have a small shirt, a medium shirt, a large shirt. I don't look at a story, we don't estimate based on time or how long it's going to take or how many days it's going to take. It's basically, is this story more work or less work than the previous story, or this item more work or less work, right? Does this cup of water have more water or less water than the previous cup? If so, if it's more water, then how much more? Is it double the amount of water? And so teams using a sizing technique similar to this or this exactly, then they'll come back and size all the work in the product backlog. So now I've gone in and I've said, okay, here are all the product backlog items that roll up to my roadmap and which rolls up to my vision, and we've sized all the work that needs to be done. And we've come to a total of 688 points in this example. So if I go through the first two sprints, I do sprint 1, we get 26 points work of done. Sprint 2, we get 15 points work of done. That gives me a velocity, what we call a velocity of 20 points. That's my average between those two numbers. Velocity is typically the average of the last 3 sprints. Some teams, I like to sometimes look at the last 5 sprints. If you don't have 3 sprints, then you might just look at your previous one. And if you've just started for the first time, then you're going to have to take a guess. Now, it's easier for me and my team because my team has been working together for a while, so we have many projects behind us to know that our team does an average velocity of X, whatever that velocity is, and it changes over time. So in a perfect world scenario, if we know our average velocity is 20, we have 688 points in our backlog. Our velocity is 20 for our team. That's how much they get done on average. Then simple math says 688 divided by 20 gives me 34.4 sprints, so we round up to 35 sprints. So 35 sprints, the 688 points should take 35 sprints. 1 sprint is 2 weeks, right? So 35 sprints times 2 weeks, then it should take 70 weeks to complete all the work in this product backlog until everything that you want is complete. And so in perfect world scenarios, we go through sprint 1, and we can easily predict based on our velocity, what we're going to have done for each sprint, right? And some sprints you'll see sprint 3 to 7 or sprint 11 through 15, because that work is too big to fit into one sprint. But we know it can fit into, for example, 5 sprints. And as I go through that, I see that, okay, to get to item AB, it's going to take me 19 sprints based on our velocity. Now let's look at real-world progress, what really happens on the projects is we go through the first sprint, and then we get feedback. All right, so we get feedback from that first sprint. Change this, what about that? And so those feedback items have to go somewhere. And so the team sizes those feedback items. So we use our sizing effort or estimate, and we size them. And then we stick them into the backlog. But in order to keep on schedule, 2 items just came off the list, and then we shift everything over, and then those feedback items then get shifted into the backlog. And that's after the first sprint. Then we go to the second sprint, which includes some of those feedback items. And what happens over time is we've now shifted things, down the road because of all the feedback that we're getting from sprint after sprint. And now that same item AB, before it took 19 sprints, now it's taking me 22 sprints, right? And that's what really happens, in real life, is that, yeah, in a perfect world, it would have taken 19 sprints, but reality is that there's feedback, there's changes, and that we count for. So we look at our velocity, and we figure out what's the best and worst case velocity, which will help us kind of judge, when we're going to be complete. So after the first sprint, and this is this example, maybe we do complete 21 points. So our velocity at that point is 21 points. The rolling average of the last 3. I don't have 3, so I'm going to use the first one. Then we do 2 sprints. Now I have a rolling average of 19. 3 sprints, I now have an average that's of the last 3. So now we're doing 16 points a sprint. And then we go on. So we do sprint 4, and then sprint down to sprint 12. So my best velocity is 20. My worst velocity, now, typically I don't go all the way back to sprint 3 because we've learned more information by now. So I would use 17 to 20. But if I want to be super conservative, I might say, okay, the least we've ever done is 16. That's really our worst case scenario. And so depending on how far back that is, I might use that number instead. If it's within the last 5 sprints, I probably use the lower number within the last 5 sprints. I typically wouldn't go past 5 or 6 sprints. So we have tuck that information away for later. So we have our best case and worst case velocity. And let's look at our backlog again, our 688 points. So there's a risk factor we would apply to if you came to me and said, I want all these items done, item A through AP, they all have to be complete. Well, I know that's not going to happen. I know because of the feedback that's going to come that we're not going to, we can get all this stuff done, but it's not going to be done in the time frame based on the perfect scenario, based on our velocity. And so what from experience and what we use is that we are 60% sure, we are 90% sure that we can get 60% of the project complete. And that's from experience. That's our kind of a risk factor we put to it. So I'm 90% sure, almost 100, but 90% sure that I can get 60% of this project complete within the time frame or budget that you're allowed or allocated. There is a book I'll mention later at the end that gives you other ways to calculate risk and apply risk factors to your total, and I'll share that near the end. All right, so 60% puts me here. Now, at 70% completed your project, I'm only 50% confident that I can get that work done. All right, so I'm 50% confident, basically maybe not. We can get 70% complete. And then I'm only 10% confident we're going to get all this work complete, again, in the allocated time or allocated budget. So that's almost a 40% buffer for feedback and changes. And so it's not that, so I account for that, but not because those, oh, I'm just adding a 40% buffer to just to, you know, to have you pay more for less. That's not really the case. It's because of the, I know, and every project has this, there's changes, there's feedback, there's things that we want to adjust. And so I'm pretty confident that we can deliver 60% of this product on that same schedule timeline. So what I can do, though, is if you do want everything, it's like work backwards. So it's like, okay, what's 60% of, how do I get 688 points then? Well, 60% of 1148 is 689 points. So then I base my proposal or projections based on getting 1,148 points worth of work complete. I look at that as a total picture, because of that, I know 60% of that we can deliver for sure. And so you might work backwards in that sense. So we have the product backlog, and I then create this, what we call a release burn-up chart. And some of you those that are familiar with Agile Scrum are familiar with this. And so we have the product backlog is in purple. This is all cumulatively all the items that have been added to the product backlog that need to be completed. So in this example, we have about 250 points worth of work that we want done for this first release. Cumulatively, all the work getting done every sprint is the blue. So every sprint we get 20 points done, 20 points done, 20 points done. Then that's the blue line. That's that cumulative work that we've completed. And then the yellow line is what we're getting done in each sprint. So you can see in sprint 3 we got less done. In sprint 4 it goes up. And so we take after the first 3 sprints, we draw a line across the cumulatively. So what's the projection on the cumulative or blue line? And then we look at our product backlog and where do those two intersect. So I see that they intersect here. That's somewhere around sprint 14. So if you want all this work completed, I know it's going to take, we're going to be done somewhere around sprint 14. I actually show this chart in every sprint review. So sprint review is for those that are not aware, every 2 weeks. So in our case, a sprint is less than a month's work of time. We do 2 weeks. So at the end of every two weeks, we're showing you the progress being made on all the work we've completed. And so let's come back to this. I'll show you how I use this in a real project. But let's talk about budget. So how do we account for budget? So let's say I have a team, if it's employees, team of 5 salary employees is for a company. Employee salary, let's say the total of all these employed people is $480,000 a year. That's what it costs to employ everybody on this team to get the work done. That means a 2-week sprint is $20,000, right? 480 divided by 24 gives you $20,000 every 2 weeks. Then we take we divide that by our velocity. So in this example, a price per point of our sizing or estimate is $1,000 to $1,176. That's how much it costs every point of size that we put on each story. We take our sprint cost divided by the velocity. So then now if I go back to my items in the backlog, I can see how many points they are that the team size. And again, these are relative to each other. The points have no unit of time on them. This team is sizing based on relativity. But now I can associate a cost. So I know item T is $2,300, item U is going to be about $15K, and item B is $9,000. This makes that conversation with clients or product owners or stakeholders a lot more effective in that it helps prevent throwing everything in the kitchen sink into the project that they want completed. Do you really want that item U? It's about $15K, about $15,000. Then it's well, you know what, I don't need it that bad. You know, or you start having that conversation, well, how do I get it down? What can I do to get how can I cut that down from a 13 to a lower size? And then now you can negotiate and have that conversation. If you're doing outside work or contract work, contractors, right, or more, or if you're doing a custom dev shop, it costs more per hour because that's typically not a long-term project. So here you can calculate the same way, $100 an hour in this example. That means a 2-week sprint costs you $40,000. 100 hours times 80 hours times 5. So the price per point is $2,000 to $2,300. So you take your cost per sprint divided by the velocity. So in this example, those same items are basically double the cost if you're contracting it out. So I take that information. So all this stuff comes together, right? It's the release burn-up, it's the budgeting, it's the velocity, it's the sizing, right? And then I can give a client what I call a budget in the box, or almost like a fixed proposal. Now, okay, if your budget is $300,000, I know my team does about 20 points per sprint or whatever that is. My cost per point is around $11.76. I'll use my worst case scenario. So that gives you 255 points to work with, and that's somewhere around 13 sprints. I can glean all that information just by having a team that's working together, it's dedicated, getting their velocity, and understanding your budget. So a lot of times I ask for the budget, you know, what's your budget? And sometimes people don't want to give up their budget, but it's really so I can calculate backwards because you got $100,000, you can have $500,000, you can have $20,000 divided by the cost per point, and this is how much work you can put into that box. And so if new functionality comes in, they say, hey, I want this done, which team sizes it, and we say, okay, it's 8 points. You're adding 8 points into the box. So this allows the client to make any changes they want, but then 8 points has to come out and go into a future bucket. If you still want to stay on budget and you still want to stay within 13 sprints, then you got to pull something of equal value out. Right? Now, I get pushback sometimes. Well, I have to have that, and I have to have that. I have to have the one I want in, and I have to have the one you're taking out, right? I get that all the time. So then we have to rethink, okay, well, let's look at those 2 items specifically, and let's look at other items in the backlog, and where can we eliminate bells and whistles? This comes into play the MVP, right? Minimum viable product. It's the not building, you want to get from point A to point B, let's not spend the time building a complete car. Let's just get you there. We'll get you there with a skateboard, right? Then we'll improve on that, and then eventually get to a bicycle and a motorcycle. And so it's eliminating the bells and whistles. It's delivering enough to get the functionality complete. So if I go back to the budget in a box, right, I'm going to say, okay, fine. If you're trying to get both of these points in there, that means we have to cut out 8 points worth of work. So where can we do that? What bells and whistles can we remove to be able to fit both in there? And this is a conversation that I have with the stakeholders or the client or the product owner, whichever, depending on what environment you're in. And it's about educating the customer along the way. Customers eventually realize as you work with them and educate them, it's, oh, you know what, I do need that report. Normally it'd be, I want that report, I want to export it to Excel, email to me once a month. I want to be able to export it to PDF. I want pie charts and line graphs. But then when you work with them, it's, okay, what do you really need? Well, I need to have the list and the numbers. Okay, how about we just give you that? And then maybe in future release, when after you have your live or your product, we can come back and add some of this additional functionality. Because what's the bare minimum to get done or get through the workflow or through the process? And then the question I ask some people say, well, what if, if the traditional method gets you a car and the Agile method gets you a car as well, then, what does it matter? Well, what if you get funding cut halfway through? What if your $300,000 budget suddenly gets, cut in half and you lose the rest of that funding? The bottom scenario is that you still have a product that you can use and that you can have customers use. The top scenario, you have nothing that you can use. There's nothing there. It's not usable, right? And so this MVP helps us be able to keep, allow you to make changes, but still try to keep some additional functionality that you wanted that might not normally fit. Just keep that in mind. So we go through 2 sprints, right, and then we get feedback. And what the team does is that they take the feedback and they size the feedback. And then with the size of the feedback and based on velocity, I say, okay, here's the cost of those feedback items. Now that cost fluctuates over time because as the team gets better with the product and better in delivering this product, their velocity typically goes up and the cost of those items come down. But I'm not necessarily focused on the dollar amount than I am in comparing them to, this helps the client or the stakeholders compare the features to each other, because sometimes the sizing makes no sense to them. Right, but if I look at feature 9 and I look at feature 6, right, feedback 9 is $2,300, feedback 6 is $30,000. Even if the cost of this goes down, that is still going to be the same difference, right? You're talking about $30,000. Even if it comes down to $20,000, feedback 9 would go down equivalently to, say, $800. So it really helps prioritize and helps drive that conversation of, okay, where do we really need these, and is it more important than the items that we have on the left? So using the release burnup, a different variation of it, right? I can trend the, let's see if I can I use a highlighter here, I can annotate. So I can trend my best case and worst case velocities. So let's say my best case was 16, right? That's this red line here, right? Worst case scenario, 16, I'm trending this red line. Best case scenario, based on my 20 points, I'm trending the green line. And so if someone asks me, okay, when will this stuff be done, right? When will we get 350 points worth of work done here, which lines up to right here? Okay, that's called fixed scope, right? And then we have to vary the time. So best case scenario, this intersects here, at where the green meets the green. That's where these two intersect. Worst case scenario, we intersect here. So what that tells me is that we're going to be done somewhere between sprint 17 to 21. Most likely probably be done somewhere in the middle. So when we're going to have this stuff, probably around sprint 19, but somewhere between sprint 17 and 21. That gives an idea. Then if they say, well, I have a conference, you know, in July, and everything after sprint 9, I need to be able to show at the conference. All right, well, that's that fixed time, and then we vary the scope. So, okay, we have to have everything done at the end of sprint 9. That means best case scenario, we're going to have it matches here. So best case scenario, we're going to have all this stuff complete, or 200 points worth of work complete, or 199, or whatever that number is. Worst case scenario, based on our worst case trajectory, then we're going to have this stuff complete. So I'm pretty confident we're going to have all this 150 done, and we're probably going to be somewhere in the middle here, about 175 points worth of work done. So then it's about working with the client to prioritize what's most important to show. Okay, so at sprint 9, we'll have somewhere between 150 to 200 points worth of work done. So now that I've kind of shown you all this stuff to kind of level set us off, I can show you now real-world slides that I use with clients. Let me turn off annotation here real quick. And all right, there we go. Okay. So these are actual slides and actual PowerPoints that I use with my clients. We don't just go to a sprint review and demonstrate the work we completed. We go to a sprint review and we talk about how the sprint went, and we present it in a more formal manner. And so one of the slides I show is, you know, here are the items we worked on. Here's the product backlog items, whether they're done or not done, right? And I'll typically show, you know, we either got 100% complete or we got 80% complete. Once I have that, then I show the team velocity. Team velocity, I'll typically, in this example, this was 3 sprints in. The velocity was 33, the sprint points were 33, 27, 30. And then we go with the assumption of, at that point, the average was 30, so sprint 4 and 5, we assume are going to be 30. And then we show this velocity over time. My release burnup that I show, this is an actual release burnup from a project, is a little bit different than what you see traditionally. You'll see an extra section here. So the section we talked about before is the blue section. So the blue section here is the product backlog. It's a different color, but it's so the blue is everything has to be done here. It's 600 points, so it's a straight line. The cumulative, everything we're getting cumulatively completed sprint after sprint, and the dark green at the bottom is how much we get done per sprint. What's the green at the top is the feedback we've collected since we've started. So I actually separate the feedback out into its own line here so that the client or the customer can see, like we originally talked about the blue here, that's what's in your box, budget in a box, but there's all this other green stuff that you want to complete as well. So the customer needs to make a decision on whether, you know, either to swap things out. In this case, this looks like we'll have everything done in blue somewhere between sprint 15 and 16, but it'll take, to get the stuff in green done, it'll take another sprint, maybe sprint 17, sprint 18. Right, so now they can budget based on, okay, I either need like 1 or 2 more sprints, 1 or 2 more, you know, another month to get this stuff done, or I need to swap things out in order to try to fit within my budget or within my timeline. I'll also show them their budget numbers. So I'll show, okay, your budget is, in this example, was $225,000. We're currently at $160,000 with release 1. And your feedback in green here is what's above and beyond what you originally were budgeting or asking for, right? So you need, it looks like you need another $25,000 or $30,000 to get that work complete. So this is kind of another view of showing visually that feedback. It's all about showing visually anything you can show visually, I show visually because that always makes a difference. And we're at 752 points, you know, per point, and which helps them address, you know, what stories to move in. I create a second release burnup. This is the second one. This is for the future work. So a lot of those things that come out, like the 8 points that came into the budget box, the 8 points that came out, I put that in another product backlog, and that's why it's a straight line. So 200 points have cumulatively gathered here for the next release. And they can kind of visually see, okay, based on our current velocity, to get all that extra work in there, take about 4 to 5 sprints somewhere in there. So it gives them that other visual. Then I show them what's coming up in the next sprint, and so they can reprioritize as needed, and that completes that sprint review. For the refinement and feedback, so refinement is where we work with our customers to say, hey, this is the feedback you collected, we sized it, and we have some questions on that feedback. So I typically would show the product backlog item, how many points the team sized it. I'll associate the cost of those items, maybe what backlog it's associated to. So in this example, we have R1 for release 1, R2 for release 2, who provided the feedback and maybe where it came from. It's sprint 4 feedback. Take that feedback, and the customer gets to decide. And I'm like, hey, here's what we originally planned on the left. Here's your feedback on the right. Where do these items go, and what priority do they go in, right? So maybe as they see the cost, they'd say, oh, well, you know what? We don't need to convert documents to PDF. That's not really that important. Or allow multiple check-ins at once. That's kind of expensive. Hey, no, I don't want that. I don't want that anymore. Either put it in the future bucket or just forget it entirely. So those are the real-world slides. That's, to wrap this up, that is what I actually show to clients. And you can use all that information that we talked about today to be able to provide these numbers. So you can provide predictability. You can, work. You can. A lot of people say, well, in Agile, you can't plan because you don't make. You don't have plans. You can't figure out when you're going to be done because it goes on forever. But that's not the case. It's a matter of, it takes a lot of effort to do this, and it's a matter of keeping up with it. Just to wrap it up, this is a book I do recommend if you're specific for software development. If you're looking for some more things along what I talked about. Nothing from this book is really in these slides other than that risk factor of 60%. But it's a book that's really geared towards projects that are specific around software and sizing and some of the topics that we talked about. So in conclusion, it takes time and effort to do what I talked about. It's not something that's, yeah, we'll just figure it out, later. Every sprint we have to update the numbers. Every sprint we have to update the release burnup. We have to update, the feedback items. We have to do our sizing with the team. We have to do our refinement activities so that the customer can prioritize these items and we can size and clarify items. It requires estimating, so I know some teams are against sizing or estimating. If you don't estimate, then you can't really do what we talked about. You can try doing it based on the number of storage points completed or number of stories completed, but that makes it a little tough. To get the most effective numbers, you need a dedicated team that stays together. You can't have team members that are off doing other things and working on other projects because that throws off your velocity and it doesn't make you predictable. The key here is you want your team to be predictable in order for these numbers to be pretty constant. It takes courage and honesty because you have to be able to say, yeah, that's not, 8 points in, you got to take 8 points out. Well, I don't want 8 points out. Well, this is, in order for you to stay on budget and on track, or we're not going to make that date, right? It brings a transparency. Gets easier with practice, and only use what's needed. Don't force it. I don't use all the slides for all our customers. I use just what's needed at the time. And that's it. Again, my name is Fred Mastropasqua with Clearly Agile. Here's my contact information, and I'll hand it back over to Isaac.
Awesome,
hey, it was
Fred.
great.
Thank you. Yep. Go ahead, Heidi.
Yeah, actually, so I have a question, and first a plug for your software pricing calculator, which is really cool because when I first came across it, I started playing around with it, and I was like, oh my gosh, it's going to cost me that much? This is crazy. So
that's why we built it, because a lot of people don't realize the cost of software, and it's like it costs. So yeah, it's fun to play with. Yeah. So thanks.
Yeah, so, but along those same lines, what if you have a team that's starting on like brand new architecture and brand new project that they're really not sure? Would you recommend that they try to go through the whole backlog of stories that they have as well and try to point them out? With some of the discoveries that they have are going to be iterative. So how do you handle things like that?
Right. So so on a new team, what we typically do, and is we do a story map session. So that usually takes and that's a different, kind of a different topic, but that takes usually a whole day or maybe 2 whole days. So we have everybody in the room. We have the whole team that's going to do the work in the room, and with the business. And then with the business, what we'll do is facilitate story map session. Who are all the roles and they're going to use the application? Let's lay out all their functionality, and let's write all the backlog items right there and then. Teams that are not used to sizing, or teams that can size, then we would just size it then, or maybe use T-shirt sizes. Teams that are not used to sizing, then what I would do is I would say, okay, put shirt sizes along the wall, and just have team members pick a story or a backlog item and just put it up where they think it goes on the wall. Like, I think this is a medium. Just start somewhere, and then take the next story and just say, do you think it's more or less? And if they're not sure, we'll just land on something. You think it's the same? Well, I think it's a little more. So this really just start somewhere and throw everything up and put everything in a bucket somewhere.
Okay.
Easier said than done, but it's possible, yeah.
Right. Yeah. I guess some of the things that you do handle discoveries like during development for things that like the buffer that you have.
Right. Yeah.
Excellent. Well, hey, I've got a question for you. One from the audience that says that often feedback doesn't manifest in new things. It may just revise an existing thing. How would you suggest tracking that separately if it affects an existing PBI? So it's not necessarily new work; it just modifies the work that was under.
I wouldn't track that any differently than new work, because that iteration is over; it's done. So if you're saying, okay, I want to move the button to the left, or instead of a list box, I want to drop down, or whatever that change is, that's still something that's still work that has to be done. It still has to be sized. It's still going to add all those little, if you add up 10 little feedback modifications, that's going to add up and delay the project. And so I don't treat those any different. Those are new items that go in the backlog. And then what you find is that some of the feedback is not as important as other feedback. So then it's focused on, okay, let's take the feedback and modifications that are more important, get those in, and save the other ones for later or for future versions. But I wouldn't treat them any different. Treat them just like no different than new work. All your defects, all your changes, all your new functionality, those are all different product backlog items.
Excellent. And then I've also got a question, 2 things kind of together. One was, how do you tag feedback, or do you track it manually? And the other one, very similarly, what software do you use to create your infographic of how you kind of pull that stuff together? Is it Jira or some other tool?
Yeah, good question. So for tracking it, for software use, I am a fan of version 1. That's version O-N-E spelled out, because it was a tool built for Agile from the ground up, and it has great tools for client-facing, product owner-facing roles. Jira is great for the development team, but it's not the best tool for anyone outside the development team, where version 1 has a lot of functionality for that. So I use that tool for a lot of my tracking and a lot of my graphs, because some of those are built in. For the release burnup, I honestly just use Excel, the Excel chart. So I just look at I use version 1, I look at the velocity of the points, and I just punch it into a template I have and to update the chart. For everything else that I show are PowerPoint templates that I've either created or gotten off the web that I've modified to show the data I want to use. But for a tool, the only tool I use is version 1. Now, if I'm working with a client, if I'm working very quickly, then I'll just track it manually, the feedback, and then enter it into the tool later.
Okay, excellent. So I'm using Excel or some kind of thing like that to jot it down quickly.
Right, and I can provide I think the slides will be available on SlideShare, but I can, if Isaac, you have to know, but I can provide a template, and you can copy and use a template.
Yeah, that would be great. Sure. It'd be wonderful if we could do that. Thank you. All right, so would you recommend people using FTEs, so they've got that fixed salary people, also point out that cost to upper management of features? So if you're, I guess, doing internal development, right, your customers are kind of internal, is that something that costs something that you'd want to report, or keep it in the story points kind of abstract world?
It depends if it'll be useful for I'm not going to report the information if there's no need to. If it's an ongoing team and management's just like, well, this is what the team costs per year and we don't care, then I'm probably not going to share that information. Where it becomes most useful is if you have a deadline, you're having to try to fit so much functionality within a deadline, and then someone needs to prioritize that work. Then that's when the cost might come into benefit, in that you can say, okay, both these functionalities are one's much more expensive than the other, but we can only fit one in, or it's a matter of only use it there if there's a way for you to benefit in helping relieve what has to be completed for a deadline, if that makes sense. I mean, if nobody cares, then again, this is use what you need. I wouldn't use it if there's no need there, but I only use it what I need to help gather discussions or help that conversation of, this is what that feature costs. Do you really want it? Or do we really have to build all the bells and whistles for this because now it's at $20,000 when we can build it for, with no bells and whistles for 10? I don't know if that answers the question, but it depends on your situation, because each situation is going to be a little bit different.
Yes, that's excellent. Thank you. Another question we have, in your example, you scoped out 70 weeks of work up front. In the real world, would you actually take the time to scope out that much work at the beginning, especially given that you know that clients are going to change their minds about a large part of it?
So there is a balance there. So we will do story mapping. So story mapping is that we will write out all the backlog items we think are needed, but we won't discuss into detail all those items, if that makes sense. So for example, and software, this is specific to software because that's a lot of my experience is, let's just say we want users to log in. Okay, that's all the item says is users to log in, but we're not going to talk about, well, how do they log in with email? What kind of passwords do they need? Can they log in using Google, Facebook? All we know, that item simply says users can log in, and we size it based on that. Now later, when we get closer to that item, when we're within 3 sprints, then we'll take that to the client or customer and say, okay, this login story, we were thinking when we sized it based on email and password. What were you thinking? And they're like, well, we were thinking Facebook, Google, Pinterest, Twitter, LinkedIn, right? Well, that's a lot more work. So we'll say, okay, well, that's more than we estimated. So we'll take each one of those platforms, break those into their own story. We'll size those, put dollar amounts to those, and say, okay, do you still want all of these? Because if you want all of these, then that's going to add more, or can we just do some of these? So we do plan out all the high-level things that have to be done from day one in that story map session, but we don't talk about the details of all those items not until they're within like 3 sprints away.
And so is that part of how you communicate then to the customer that I saw on one of your slides, you said, it's a subject to change. You just communicate if one of these blows up bigger than what it saw, is that how you handle it for them?
Yeah, so correct. So if one of these blows up really, really large, the minute we know, we tell the customer immediately. So hey, this item, we need to talk about it. And then we figure out a way, we negotiate with the client, and that's where they can change what they want for free, but if they want to stick within their budget or timeline, then we need to negotiate what that change is. So it might be that we can't log into 10 different platforms and still stick within your date and budget. That's where the courage and honesty comes in. We'd only plan to maybe do 2. So either pick 2 or you need to extend the project. And so the minute we know, then we have that conversation with the client then.
Okay, so this question kind of ties into, actually there's 2 that are very similar, expectations of the client. So what if the client's expecting you to estimate, very accurately, and they want to know that you've got all the dependencies figured out? You're building that car, and they want to know that you're going to deliver when you say you are, and that all the gear shafts and everything's going to tie together, and so they're not interested in a skateboard. They want the complex engine and motor figured out up front. How do you help navigate a customer or a client like that, or have you not experienced that?
That's a good question. Well, not every customer is fit for this model, right? So there have been people we've turned away because they want fixed scope, fixed time, fixed budget, which is basically impossible. We have to vary something. So we could say you want fixed scope, meaning you want the full car, the engine, and such have you, then we know that we have to vary the time All right, the time's going to directly vary the budget. So if you're looking for that, you have to have everything, all the bells and whistles. Then that is a tricky conversation. What I typically would gear them towards is, we can build you, parts of the car that work, that get you there, but that's, and it's more of an education thing. But I can't guarantee that we're going to get all the bells and whistles and get it within your fixed time and fixed budget. Now I don't typically run into this issue that often, because in our story map session, we know, okay, typically your team of professional developers are smart. They've built lots of software before. So if I had a team of people that built cars before, right, they typically will be able to do some type of relatively accurate sizing. There's never been anything we can't size, have no idea. Even if it's something brand new, though, then it's okay if we do a little bit of research, in that story mapping. Oh, you want to be able to fire off a rocket to the moon? Well, we've never fired off a rocket to the moon. Let's look that up, what that might entail, high level. And then we'd have to put a large estimate to that with the customer. And we'd have to note that, hey, we can build this rocket to the moon. We think it's going to be this big, this long, but we've never done it before, right? It's something new. And so what we're going to do is as we start building it, we're going to pull in what we call research stories or spike stories to do research on the areas that we're not familiar with. And then we'll report that back every 2 sprints to give you an update on what that is. But that's it for something we've never done before, and I've never really run into something that we've never been able to size accurately, because I've built so much software, my teams have built so much software in the past, there's nothing you can really throw at the team that say, credit card processing, login, I want to integrate with 3 different systems. It's always the same thing in the end, right? It's an API, it sends fields, it sends data, receives data. So it's not as that issue really only applies if you have no idea what you're doing from the very beginning, I guess, to say. And so then, yes, you would run into trouble. You probably would run into issues. I don't know if that answers the question, but it's definitely an education with the customer and a journey, and educating them that this is a journey we're taking together.
And that's excellent, and it ties back to what you said about having courage and basically making that statement of, this is the way that we work, and not allowing yourself or your team to get put into a corner where they can't deliver or they've got a bad percentage of delivering. I'd also say that your calculator tool helps a lot kind of level set expectations, instead of them thinking, I want all this stuff and I want it for $1,000.
Oh yeah, so, yeah, and that's what spawned off that tool, because a lot of people would come and say, I want to rebuild Instagram for cars and I want it for $20,000, and it's like, well, $20,000 gets you a login screen and a blank page. You're not going to be able to get a full app with that.
Awesome. Well, that's great. And so we're coming up on our time here. So Fred, let me just say for myself and Heidi, just a huge thank you for this information. It's been wonderful, and I know I've taken a lot of tips away from it. We are going to take the recording and we'll make it available on a blog post. And if we can get your slides as well on SlideShare, happy to share that with people. And then let everybody know that our next event, thank you, our next event will be coming up on June the 5th, 4 to 5 for Eastern folks, and it's going to be Agile Metrics That Mean Something. Our speaker is going to be Bob Woods. And if you have any ideas for future topics or want to help out with a future meeting, feel free to let us know. Again, the website is Coaching Agile Journey. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today. And again, Fred, big thank you for this content. Excellent, excellent presentation. We appreciate it.
Thank you, everybody.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good one, guys. Bye-bye.